Hi, this is Rick Shear with VMware Tips, and this is our VMware vSphere 5 video series. Part 3, VMware vSphere 5.0 Auto Deploy. In this video, we're going to cover the installation and configuration of VMware vSphere 5 Auto Deploy, which allows users to automatically deploy VMware ESXi 5.0 hosts along with their associated configurations, as well as being able to slipstream third-party modules and plugins such as EMC PowerPath Virtual Edition, the VMware vCloud Director Agent, and vmware-fdm for VMware HA. Alright, so let's get started. I'm going to be doing this installation from the ground up. So first thing we're going to do is install vCenter Server 5.0. I'm using the Windows-based installation for this demonstration, but the new VMware vCenter Server appliance will work just fine for VMware Auto Deploy as well. But for this demonstration, we will use the Windows version. I'm just going to skim through the installation. We'll fast forward a little bit and see that the installation is complete. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and install is the vSphere client, so we can actually connect and see the vCenter Server installation. Obviously, this is not required to install on the vCenter server, but for this demonstration, I'm going to install the client on that same box as well. So basically, the way Auto Deploy works is it's a multi-step process. You have the vCenter server, obviously, which is the central management point of your ESX hosts and your VM virtual machines. But then there's also a VMware Auto Deploy service that you have to install. We'll install that after we install the vSphere client. The Auto Deploy service is basically a web server, and that web server serves up the images of ESXi. And we're going to use the image builder, which is a PowerCLI, PowerShell commandlet that allows us to build ESXi based images and then create rules to push out those images to our hosts. So the client installation is complete. We're now going to go ahead and install that Auto Deploy service. It's recommended that Auto Deploy is installed on the same server as the vCenter server. The vCenter server appliance, the vApp, actually has it embedded as well in the one appliance. So once you install that appliance, Auto Deploy is automatically configured. We're going to go ahead and choose our repository location and repository size. That repository is where we keep our ESXi images. Next, we create our connection to our vCenter server. We choose a server port. The default is good there. And we choose which IP address or network connection the Auto Deploy server should use to talk to the network. So it's going to go ahead and install Auto Deploy. Installation is finished. We'll go ahead and exit the installer and open up our vSphere client. We'll make our connection to our vCenter server. Obviously receive the certificate warning for the first login attempt. We can install the certificate so we don't see that warning any further. Let's go ahead and skip that screen. Evaluation notice, because this is a new installation. No licenses have been installed. And you see we have a fresh, brand new install of vCenter server. No hosts, no clusters, no nothing. If we click on the home button and click on the server status, we can see that Auto Deploy is installed and connected and configured. And we have an Auto Deploy icon as well, which shows us some default basic information. We'll use that a little bit later. The next thing I'm going to do is actually install a TFTP server. We need a TFTP server so we can actually push the gPXE bootloader to our host. So I'm going to go ahead and install a SolarWinds TFTP server. This is a free product you can download from SolarWinds. There is a number of other TFTP products out there. I found this one to be the simplest to install and use. So we go ahead and install that. I've installed this on the same server as my vCenter server. Obviously, you can install it anywhere you want. Next, I'm going to create a TFTP folder on the C drive. And then go to the auto deploy option from within vCenter and click download TFTP boot zip. I'm going to download this zip to that TFTP folder I created on my C drive. Then we'll go and extract that zip to that folder. What this zip is going to contain is all of the gPXE boot information. So this is actually the bootloader that will get streamed to our host upon boot. Next, I'm going to open up the TFTP Server configuration. I'm going to choose Configure. I'm going to choose the directory for the default files. So CTFTP is my default, where I've placed my boot images. I'm going to then go ahead and start my instance. All the default configuration, other options are okay. Another thing I'm going to do is actually go and disable the Windows firewall. So just to avoid any issue with the Windows firewall blocking any ports or any traffic, I'm just going to keep this simple, ensure that my demonstration works, and go ahead and disable the firewalls. So all firewalls will be disabled. And for good measure, I'm just going to go back and restart that TFTP instance. Alright, so that's complete. TFTP is running. Our boot images are within our root TFTP folder. We can see SolarWinds is running right there. We're good to go right there. The next thing I'm going to do is install PowerCLI. So to configure and use auto deploy, all of the configuration is done within PowerShell. So PowerCLI is a must. And I'd highly recommend that if you haven't already used PowerCLI or PowerShell, that you start dabbling a little bit. You install PowerCLI, start learning the commandlets, and start using it, not on a day-to-day basis, but just start using it so you understand what it is and how you use it. PowerCLI is extremely powerful, and you can do a lot of cool things with the PowerShell scripting language. During installation, it does recommend that you change the execution policy. So I'm going ahead and doing that right now. We'll go back and continue the installation of PowerCLI. Alright, so PowerCLI installation is complete. The next thing I'm going to do is actually grab the necessary images that I need to slipstream into my ESX image. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually download the vCloud Director agent from my vCloud Director server. So I'm using WinSCP, which is a Windows-based SCP client. I'm downloading the VCD, vCloud Director agent, from my vCloud Director server and placing it on a folder on my server, on my Windows-based server. And we can see I've downloaded that right there, and it's good to go. The next thing I'm doing is I've downloaded PowerPath Virtual Edition, version 5.7. This is the latest edition of PowerPath by EMC. I've downloaded the zip file from PowerLink, and within that zip there is a PowerPath Virtual Edition VMware bundle zip that includes all the necessary VIB files, VIB files. We're going to use that zip to slipstream that into our ESXi image as well. All right. So next I'm going to open PowerCLI. I'm going to make my connection to my vCenter server. I'm going to extend out this window just a little bit. It's a little small by default. Make it a little bit easier to read. All right, my connection has been made. I'm connected to the vCenter server. The first thing we have to do is add our ESXi repository. So you can see I have my ESXi image here, the compressed zip file. That's ESXi version 5.0. The first thing we need to do is add that repository. So VMware calls this the software depots. So I'm going to go ahead and add that first software depot, which is my ESXi 5.0 zip. So I'm just going to grab the file name here, copy that, and paste it into PowerCLI. And we can see now that that depot has been added. Next thing I'm going to do now is add my software depot for PowerPath. So I'm going to go ahead and add the path, full path to that zip file for PowerPath. Paste that into PowerCLI as well. And now the depot for PowerPath has been added as well. Next, we're going to do the same for vCloud Director. So I'm going to grab the path and file name to our vCloud Director agent. This is the agent that needs to be installed on the ESX host so it can be used as a physical resource in vCloud Director. When you're using auto deploy, this has to be done to ensure that it's going to work with vCloud Director. So I've gone ahead and add that agent as well. And then finally, I'm going to add a URL for the VMware Fault Domain Manager agent. This is used for VMware HA. You can actually grab the agent directly from the vCenter server by adding that URL right there. The next thing we're going to do is create an image profile. The image profile is going to be basically the image that contains every module, every feature that you want bundled in together. So at a very core, we need to have ESXi 5.0. So I'm adding a new image profile. I'm calling it ESXi Auto Deploy Full. And the first thing we're adding is that ESXi image. The next thing we're going to do is add to the ESXi Auto Deploy Full profile, and we'll be adding the VMware Fault Domain Manager package. So that's denoted by vmware-fdm. So now we've just added the Fault Domain Manager into that ESXi Auto Deploy Full profile. Now using the get command, we can see that there is a name called vCloud agent, as well as PowerPath.lib sim plugin. And what we're going to do is we're going to add all four of those to that existing image profile as well. So we're doing an add ESX software package. Image profile is our ESXi Auto Deploy Full. And we're adding the software package vCloud-agent. Now we're going to add PowerPath.lib.esx, followed by PowerPath.sim and PowerPath.plugin. And with that, our image is complete. We have created an image. That image has ESXi, FDM, PowerPath, and the vCloud agent all embedded. The next thing we have to do is create a deploy rule. So because there are no hosts, there is no host profile created. This is a greenfield installation. We're going to create a new rule. We're going to call that rule pre-host profile. The item is ESXi auto deploy, and this is applied to all hosts, all potential hosts. When you create that new rule, this is actually when it's going to start downloading and installing all of the modules into the auto deploy repository. One thing to note, because this PowerCLI session is per session, when you create images, if you were to exit PowerCLI, there is no way to back up those images. They would be stored within the auto deploy server, but there is no way to reuse those images. So we need to export that image to a bundle if we want to reuse that image. That image meaning ESXi, vCloud Director Agent, FDM agent, and our PowerPath agents. So using the export ESX image profile, we can export that to a zip file to reuse later. And then finally, after we create the deploy rule, we have to add the deploy rule. So simply using the add deploy rule and then specifying the pre-host profile deploy rule. All right. So what I'm doing now is actually creating an ESXi image. Because VMware allows us to virtualize ESXi, it makes it extremely easy to build test and dev environments. So what I'm doing right now is going through and creating an ESXi virtual machine. To run ESXi, you need a minimum of 2 virtual processors and 2 GB of RAM. For auto deploy to work, I suggest using the E1000 virtual NIC. A local disk is not required. We'll go ahead and edit this virtual machine before saving, and we can go ahead and remove the DVD and floppy drives. Keep this as minimal as possible. As you can see though, for guest operating system, there's nothing called VMware ESXi. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose other 64-bit and put in the name VMware ESXi 5.x. We also have to choose the CPU settings to ensure that we choose emulation of the Intel EPT. So we'll choose that. We can go ahead and hit finish after we verify everything. Let's go back now and edit that virtual machine's properties, because there's a couple things we need from it. After the machine's created, we can actually go back and see that VMware ESXi 5 is an option. So we'll choose that as the guest operating system. And then on the network card, we'll actually copy the MAC address, because we do need to go edit our DHCP server to tell it where the TFTP server is. So I'm going to make a remote desktop connection to my DHCP server. I'm going to log into that DHCP server. Open up the DHCP server manager. I'm going to go ahead and actually create a new reservation for my new ESXi virtual machine. So in Windows DHCP, I'll just right click and choose New Reservation. I'm going to give this reservation a name. I'm going to choose an IP address that will be the static IP for that host. And I'm going to paste the MAC address. But because Windows does not use a semicolon as a separation in the MAC address octets, we have to change that to a dash. Then we'll go ahead and view the reservation options, where we need to put in option 66, the boot server hostname, which is our vCenter server, or the where we have the TFTP image installed, and then option 67, which is our boot file name. And that's pretty much it. We can actually boot up that virtual machine now. It's going to grab an IP address via DHCP. DHCP is going to tell it that the next server is our TFTP server, where the image is that gPXi bootloader. gPXi is streamed to that virtual machine or that ESXi host, where it goes ahead and it has to reset the NIC. This is basically an operating system that's been booted up. It grabs an IP address, and then gPXi actually tells it where to go next. So the next piece is grabbing the actual ESXi bits from the auto-deploy server. And as you can see here, that ESXi image was booting up, and it's fully up and operational now. So ESXi host up and running. We actually go over to our vCenter server and see that it's automatically added to vCenter. Because we did not create any rules specifying what cluster or data center to use, it just created a default data center called untitled and added it to that data center. If we view the hardware stats for that ESXi image, we can actually see that the PowerPath modules have been installed and loaded. We can also see that vmware-fdm and the vCloud director agents have been installed as well. So this host booted up, grabbed its image via gPXi from the auto-deploy server, slipstreamed with the modules and agents we need. It's ready to go. Basically, the only thing we need to do now is configure it to our liking. So for this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and just make a change to the default virtual switch. I'm going to change the name of one of the port groups. So this VMware Network port group, I'll change that to ProdNet with VLAN 200. I'll also go through my configuration, make sure everything else is okay. I'll set up an NTP server. So this ESXi host can grab and sync its time via NTP. Everything else looks okay. You can see this is a fully functional ESXi box. It's been loaded via auto deploy. What I'm going to do now is actually add an NFS data store, just so we have some storage attached to it. Alright, things look pretty good. I think this server is configured to my liking. I'm going to go ahead and create a host profile for it then. I'm going to take all of that configuration that I just did and create a profile that I can use to attach to other hosts that are connected to this vCenter server. So I created a host profile called prod-ESX. I'm also going to create a cluster now called prod cluster. I'm going to turn on VMware vSphere HA, choose the defaults for all of the options. I'm going to go ahead and add that ESXi host to that prod cluster after I attach my host profile to it. So host profile has now been attached to that existing host. I can go ahead and check for compliance, and we'll see that everything is good, denoted by the green symbol next to profile compliance. We'll then add that to our cluster. VMware can configure HA for it because the FDM agent's been installed. And I think we're about ready now for our second ESXi host. So that's configuring HA. We'll wait for that to finish up and we'll be good to go. What we're going to have to do next, because we created a host profile and is we'll go back to PowerCLI. We'll create a new deploy rule that basically states install the image, but let's add it to this production cluster. Alright, so I brought up PowerCLI. We're going to create a new deploy rule. We're going to give that deploy rule a name of prod cluster, just for some consistency. We're going to say that that rule should install the ESXi auto deploy full image. Once the image has been applied, we're going to also apply the prod ESXi profile. This is the host profile that we created. And then also add it to our prod cluster. So you can see there, ESXi image, host profile, and vSphere cluster. We can also use patterns to denote what hosts should receive this image. This could be a MAC address. This could also be a hardware model. So our virtual machines actually show up a model of VMware Virtual Platform. So what this means is that all hosts that are booted up to that gPXE server with the model VMware Virtual Platform will get this image with these rules. After the deploy rule is created, we'll add that deploy rule. But we also have that old deploy rule out there, that pre-host profile deploy rule. So we're going to go ahead and delete that. So we'll use the remove deploy rule syntax to remove that pre-host profile deploy rule. Alright, so that's it for PowerCLI. Let's go and actually create our second virtual machine. So I'm going to switch over to my other environment. We'll go and create a new virtual machine. Custom configuration. We'll call this auto deploy demo 3. VM hardware 8. We're going to say this is other 32-bit for now, 2 processors, 2 gigabytes of RAM, one network card using the E1000, no hard drive. We'll edit the machine, go and delete the DVD and floppy. Again, VMware ESXi 5.x is not there. So what we'll do is just use other, type in VMware ESXi 5.x. We'll change the CPU virtualization to Intel EPT. We'll hit finish, but then we'll go back and edit that machine so we can grab the MAC address. We'll also go back and change that guest operating system now to ESXi 5.x. That's now shown and visible. We can now switch over to our DHCP server and create a new reservation for this second host. So we'll give that a reservation name. Give it an IP address that's statically assigned. Paste in the MAC address, but change those those colons to dashes to follow the Windows configuration. We'll then go and add our option 67 and option 66. 66 being the TFTP Server, option 67 being the actual boot file name. And now that that's done, we can actually go and boot that host, or in this case, virtual machine. We can see the virtual machine starting to be powered up. We'll see that the network card will grab an IP address via DHCP, which is then also told to then go to the next server, or option 66, and grab option 67 from that server, which is the gPXi bootloader. gPXi then starts up, grabs an address, and then tells it to grab everything else that it needs, images, configuration, etc., from the auto deploy server. So it's downloading that file, the image configuration, from auto deploy now. And we can see ESXi is starting up. We'll fast forward a little bit and see that it's complete. The server is brought up, and if I switch over to my vCenter server within a few seconds here, we can see that this new host has been added to the prod cluster. All the configurations being done to it. The host profile is automatically attached as well. Configuring for vmware-fdm, and we're going to be good to go. 2 hosts up within a matter of minutes. After the initial configuration is done, you can really spin up these ESXi hosts really fast. The great thing about it as well is if you ever have a problem, you need to update drivers, you need to do any changes, it's as simple as just creating a new deploy rule, updating the deploy rule, and rebooting that host. Every time this host reboots, it's effectively getting a new version of ESXi. Alright, we sure did a lot in this video. First, we installed vCenter Server for Windows. We then installed the vSphere client, followed by VMware Auto Deploy. We installed the SolarWinds TFTP Server, which we then configured and loaded our bootloader data, that's gPXi loader. We then installed PowerCLI, which we used to create our ESX image profile and auto deploy rule, where we slipstreamed PowerPath Virtual Edition, vCloud Director Agent, and VMware Fault Domain Manager, which is used for VMware HA, into that image profile. We then gPXi booted our ESXi hosts, which were automatically installed then with ESXi. All of the configuration were applied to it. And after we configured our hosts, we created a host profile, which we updated our rule, which we were able to boot our second ESXi host with all of that host profile information as well. All in all, did everything that we needed to do, and I thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.